and welcome to First Mennonite Church. I am so glad that you have all taken time out of your schedules to worship with us this morning. I'm Pastor Glenn Balzer, and I am one of two pastors here. Pastor Claudia is away this weekend, but don't worry. I have some friends here who've been here most of the weekend who will, Anton will be sharing in the message this morning, and you'll meet Ugo in a little while too. But we do have some announcements that we want to share with you right away. And the first announcement we don't have a slide for. It was an email I received from Donna Swartzendruber, and she asked that everybody circle Monday, September 27th on their calendar, because there will be a Zoom call led by Ernie Candle, and he will be discussing the status of Haiti, and there's going to be more details in the upcoming weekly with that. So look for information for that. What we'd ask you is I'm going to start again. What I was telling the folks who were meeting with us just before the service, one of the things that has been strange to me as we have been regathering in person again is that our services have sort of three endings to them. We have the benediction that brings to the end of the live stream. Then we do a pastoral prayer and sharing, and that kind of comes to an end. And then we'll do some singing out on the patio, and then that comes to the end. So at the conclusion of the third conclusion, there is a fellowship time that we would invite you all to in the community center for donuts and coffee. And so just take note of that. As well, for those who participated in the Reparations Sunday School class that took place over the summertime, today, Sunday, September 19th at 11:30 on Zoom, look for a link in the weekly that came out on Thursday, as they just want to do a review of the progress of that class. And so just take note of that. Something that has been happening an awful lot lately is people have been calling me and saying, I'm not getting my weekly. Why did you drop me from the FMC email list? What I want to assure everybody of is we are not intentionally not emailing you. But sometimes our service has a mind of its own and just decides that you don't get to have the FMC weekly or the FMC pastoral update anymore. So if you are not getting it, there's some instructions there, but check your junk folder first. And then what you need to do is if it's showing up in your junk folder, you need to add the staff to your email account list that says that we aren't spam. And if all of that isn't working, just please reach out to Marie Volk, and she will work at getting you back onto the email. As many of you know, Vic Esch passed away, and we will be having his service coming up. And for the reception, we are wanting to have a pie reception for Vic. And so Lola is looking for people to help with that. And if you are someone who loves to make pies, just reach out to Lola and let her know. And that service will be held on October 2nd at 2 o'clock. And then on October 3rd, the Sunday, following the service, Vicky Murau and Romaine Anderson will be having a special concert for us here in the sanctuary. And so again, take note of that. And October 23rd, a Live Well, Die Well seminar. And see the weekly for more information about that. And next weekend is our great getaway. And so there will be folks who are going to Rocky Mountain Mennonite Camp for the weekend. And we will also be having a service here at First Mennonite Church. And so wherever you are, there will be an opportunity to worship together. Pastor Claudia will be down at the camp, and I will be here at the church. And then finally, the Rocky Mountain MCC sale will be taking place in person on October 15th and 16th, and I see that Jordan Penner has just walked into the building. So if you have questions about the sale, he is the person you need to talk to. And so just reach out to Jordan, and he will more than be willing to answer all of your questions. Now I would invite you to turn into your voices together today to 283. Now is that time of the service where we share the peace of Christ with one another. But again, we are in new times, and so before I invite you to do that, just some instructions. Everybody is wearing a name tag. If that name tag has no border on it, you can go up and greet that person just like you did in March of 2020. If the name tag has a blue border on it, ask the person how you would like to greet them. Maybe they want to have a handshake. Maybe you want to wish the peace of Christ from a distance. But take time to ask the person. If the person has a red border around their name tag, just greet them from 6 feet away and wish them the peace of Christ. And so now I would invite you to stand up and greet each other in these new times with the peace of Christ.
That's right. I walked right by.
Depends on what school. What about you? Do you, Micah, go to school in person or on a computer? In person. And what about you?
I go to Park Hill in person and Park Hill
So all of you are in person and you have to wear masks like all day?
Yeah, except for lunchtime and recess.
But like when I first came here, like one of the things that I like when I'm a visitor someplace is that one of the things that makes me feel welcome is just a smile, right? Just to have someone smile at me makes me feel like I'm welcome in this place. So what have y'all been doing? You haven't been in school for a long time, and now you're in school and you have to wear a mask that hides your beautiful smile. So how? And you can't even like give someone a hug. You can't give someone a handshake. So how do you let the other kids in your class, let them know that they are welcome in that school with you?
You can say hi, and then your name, or you just shake their hand back or give them a hug.
You are allowed to give them a hug or
And a handshake.
a handshake.
Same thing in our school.
You can. And do you think that makes people feel welcome?
Yeah.
What do you think would make them feel like Park Hill or whatever school you go to, Micah, is not the school that I want to be at? What would make someone not feel welcomed at your school?
No handshake.
No handshakes. When I was in middle school, I thought it was no milkshakes. I thought I had come from a school where everyone had milkshakes at school, and then went to this new school and there were no milkshakes. But you think handshakes? I'll give that's a pretty.
Actually, Park Hill doesn't serve milkshakes. They only serve milkshakes on holidays when we're there because it's a special day.
now that I'm older, milkshakes are only for special occasions too. So, I was just ahead of my time. So, I just wanted to just point that out because we are all trying to figure out, well, how do we live together now? When do we have our mask? When do we not have our mask? When do we handshake? When do we not handshake? And yet all of those things that we just talked about, when someone's new in our school, in our home, visiting us in this church, one of the things that we all want to do is to replicate what Jesus did when Jesus said, let the children come unto me, and anyone who's going to feel welcome, we have to make them feel welcome just like the children that are always in our presence. So hopefully these folks give you lots of hugs and handshakes and at least smiles every day. All right, let's pray. Jesus, you made all of us feel welcome, from the oldest to the youngest, and especially you said, let the children come unto me. Help us to learn, not only from you, Jesus, but from these children, what it means to show welcome.
Good morning, my name is Hugo Salcedo. I've been enjoying your services online from Texas, so I'm glad to be here in person today. Please join me in the call to worship in your bulletins or in Voices Together 3. Be sincere in your love for others. Love each other and honor others more than yourself. When others are happy, be happy with them. When they are sad, be sad. But try to earn the respect of others and do your best to live at peace with everyone.
Friends, would you join me in prayer? Creator God, we thank you for bringing us here together in this moment and in this time. It is my prayer this morning that you would open our hearts to be the people that you have called us to be. We pray this in your name.
Today's scripture comes from Mark chapter 9, verses 30 to 37. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. And he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. When he is killed, after 3 days, he will rise. But they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him. And they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you discussing on the way? He kept silent. For on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12. He said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last, and last of all, and servant of all. And he took a child and put him in the midst of them. And taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me.
Number 732 in your purple book. And yes, I did write the numbers down there. We're not going to try to do verse 4, which is more like a bridge than a verse. And this in any language that you wish, whatever you're comfortable with.
Good morning again, and it is good to be here. This is actually the first trip that I have taken during this pandemic, and so it's a bit surreal, but also feels good to be back here. I have been here before. I think my beard was still white then as well, so it is really good to be here. If you know Sarah Jackson wrote about an encounter that she and I had in her book. She was, I think, volunteering at the Aurora Processing Center and felt a call to do something a little deeper. And apparently at a protest, she heard someone mention a small hospitality house in rural southwest Georgia called El Refugio. And upon learning about it, she looked it up on the internet and reached out to me, who happened to be the founder of El Refugio, and she said she wanted to come and visit and learn from us, and would we welcome her to do that. And I was like, sure. And then she had a couple of peculiar, she talks about this in the book, she had a couple of peculiar questions. She was like, I love to dance salsa, and whenever I travel, I always wonder if there are clubs where I can go salsa dancing. Any possibility that I could get some salsa dancing in during my visit? To which I responded to her, I was like, well, the town of LaGrange where we live is 30,000 people. There's no salsa club. And I said, and the detention center is in a town of just 1,000 people with lots of salsa dancers. Unfortunately, they are all detained. That was the beginning of our relationship. Sarah would come and visit and would soak in from us everything she could about our hospitality, trying to create a place of welcome outside of what at the time was the largest immigration detention center in the United States. Now here we are 10 or so years later, and I am staying at Casa de Paz at their new home, and we'll be getting to visit. I got to meet Samir and Bumi last night, and we'll get to visit with Sarah over the course of the next couple of days, and I'm coming to her to learn from her. We're both tired right now. I don't know if you follow her announcements, notifications, but the number of individuals that are being processed through immigration detention centers and being released has increased multiple folds just this summer. And if I'm honest, the overwhelming numbers of individuals that we're seeing being released, to give you an idea, at the detention center that we work at, if 5 people were released and we were helping them upon their release, I felt like that was a lot of people. The other night we had 79 people who were released at 10 p.m. with nowhere to go, no flights, nothing, and just a small ragtag group of volunteers trying to figure out, what does welcome look like? I'm in my 5th decade here, or I'm now in my 6th decade, right? I'm in my 50s, and as you and I all know, life also brings with it some unwelcomed events, traumas and scars and pains and suffering that come with living this life. And yet, all of my adult spiritual formation, all of my receiving. In other texts, it says welcome. That's been probably the central charism of my entire ministry. Life in all of its expressions, whether it was in the church, at a college, or now amongst those seeking asylum in our country. It's the question of how far can we go to be welcome? What are the limits of our capacity to be welcome? Right now, all over the globe, God's children are on the move. All over this planet, we see folks that are internally displaced because of conflicts. We see migrants, we see refugees, we see climate change victims, and we see asylum seekers, not just coming to the United States, but movement all over the world. And yet, less than 900 miles south of here, even closer to where Ugo lives, 12,000 asylum seekers are currently seeking refuge under the shadow of a bridge in a small town called Del Rio, Texas. Population 30,000. Most of these asylum seekers, I hear that you all are going to be talking about this, are from Haiti, the poorest country in our hemisphere. And not a quick, easy trip to get from Haiti to anywhere except maybe the Dominican Republic. The problems that we're seeing that are causing a lot of our churches to respond right now is just the culmination of just endless generations of suffering and oppression and injustice from debts and other calamities. More specifically, in our lifetime, we're seeing still migration that comes out of the 2010 earthquakes. Many folks from Haiti fled to South America and stayed in Brazil for a number of years to help build up for the 2016 Olympics. And so a lot of the folks that are in Del Rio are folks who left back after the post-2010, sometime between 2010 and 2017. So by the time they come to Del Rio wondering, is there a place of welcome for us? They're fluent not only in Haitian Creole, but also Spanish and Portuguese oftentimes. And so now, here they are, sitting in this borderland, in this marginal space, as marginalized people, wondering, much like the text today. I was fascinated how the text today can bookend something so heavy, like Jesus' death, with something so light, like welcoming children and being a ministry of welcome. And if you're at the border, I bet that right now, the folks who are on the front lines of that, during a pandemic, during a humanitarian crisis, walk between those two spaces. That the very migrants themselves walk between those two spaces. Is this my death? We had a Haitian woman who came and spent time at Casa Alterna with us, and indeed her sister did not make the full journey with her. And yet we also see life, and we see children being born into this world and welcomed into this space, and filling even those miserable, marginalized, liminal spaces with joy. Will this be my death? Or will I find welcome? That's what Jesus is talking about in this passage. But notice Jesus isn't someone who's on the move in any great way. Maybe he's internally displaced in more of a spiritual sense. But he's in his homeland. He's in Galilee, this place that is a political hotbed. It sometimes is violent. It's ruled with absolute autonomy. Herod and his sons raising their own taxes. It's a rebellious people. And this is Jesus' home. But it's also a place where not only did he not receive welcome, but he received the opposite, right? He was often ill-received. And he's feeling down. Let's be honest. I mean, he's talking about betrayal and his own pending death. And no one's understanding him. But he's also talking about something about a resurrection. And who can understand that? Even now, so much later. The disciples are confused, and yet from the depths of those woes, Jesus pulls aside a child Even though maybe you'd say, if you just look at the first part, you're like, well, Jesus sounds a little bit pessimistic or realistic or just a bit down or a bit, downtrodden. But even in the midst of that, even though in his own hometown, he had had experiences of being ill-received, of being unwelcomed, where demands were made of him, where he was met with disfavor, where his own cousin, John the Baptist, is decapitated. Even then, Jesus decides to pivot towards hope. And the best way Jesus knows how to pivot towards hope is not just by extending words of welcome, but by embodying welcome. And that's why he uses a child as his sermon illustration. At Casa Alterna, we seek to embody welcome. And so what I want to do is, I want to give you a tour, an embodied tour of what welcome looks like through our lens. And my hope is that it doesn't just become some type of promo for our little ministry, but that instead each of these rooms, each of these spaces will talk about our inner rooms and how we can develop postures and habits of embodied welcome wherever we are. So if you start with me at the airport in Atlanta, the world's busiest airport, this is where individuals that are being processed are still in the asylum-seeking process, and they've been released from detention out of Georgia's detention facilities. They're being released at the world's busiest airport, sometimes at 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, well after there's any chance of catching any flight. And they don't know that we're there. We have a sign that says Casa Alterna. We might have t-shirts that say Casa Alterna. But what we do is we rush the vans that arrive, these unmarked vans that have secure cages on the inside. And maybe it's just out of necessity. I don't know what creates it. But immediately there's a bond of trust that is established. And these folks who have traveled many, many miles, placing their trust in us, outsiders, unknown to them, quite fluent, not necessarily in their language, but in Google Translate. So the question that I ask myself is, what steps did I have to take, or for us today, what steps do we have to take to make ourselves trust the so-called others? What does it take for two complete strangers from completely different, polar opposites experiences in life to form a bond of trust? What risk do I have to take? What fears do I have to confront? And what would make me more trustworthy? The airport is a good visual reminder for me of what happens in that space, because there have been times where there has not been trust established. Most of our guests then, we call them companions at the airport, most of our companions are able to fly. We have literally helped thousands of asylum seekers upon their release from immigration custody get on their way to their new home somewhere in the United States. And most of them are able to catch their flight or catch their bus that same day, but we do have a remnant of people who need hospitality, who need someplace to stay overnight. And that place where Casa Alterna hosts people overnight is the Atlanta Friends Meeting, a Quaker meeting house just on the edge of downtown Atlanta. And that's actually where Charlotte, my spouse, and I reside. As soon as the guests walk up the entryway and walk into the meeting house, the first thing they see on the outside, right, is first of all it says Atlanta Friends Meeting, which is an interesting concept, the idea, the Quaker concept of why they are the religious society of friends, yes? I mean, one of the core values of Quakerism, and I would say for Anabaptists as well, is this idea that there is that of God within everyone. And if there is that of God within everyone, and if everyone is created in the image of God, and therefore everyone has inherent dignity, and everyone should be treated with equality, then what is the most equalizing term that we can give one And so already the distance between us and them is broken down by that simple act of saying, welcome, friend. We even have a sign as soon as they walk in that I didn't put there. It exists long before this ministry joined with the Quakers, but it says everyone is welcome. So that's another posture of welcoming, of hospitality, of finding what makes us all common in the eyes of God. So they walk into the space. Quakers would refer to it as a meeting house and a meeting room, but you and I might call this a sanctuary. A sanctuary. A sacred space. A place of refuge or safety. But in too many churches, a sanctuary is a place that's used 1 hour per week for a sacred ritual. And I say sacred ritual because these times are holy. But worship and the sacred exist well beyond the hours of one ritual. What does it mean to be a place of sanctuary, a place of safety, a place of refuge? In all of its ways. Then I show our guests to the kitchen. The kitchen as well is where welcome means adapting to new cultures. And in the kitchen, it is most evident the adaptations that take place. A good friend of mine who started the Open Door community in Atlanta, Ed Loring, has a saying. He says, justice is important, but supper is essential. Right? The table fellowship, the communion, the breaking of bread, of seeing Jesus in the face of the person who is unrecognizable at first. Justice is important, but there's something beautiful about the breaking of bread. When our guests are with us long enough, and the beauty of being in a diverse city like Atlanta is that if I can have lunch or dinner with them, I'll take them to a restaurant if they have outdoor patio dining, or we'll get takeout, and we'll share a meal from their country of origin. It's been a beautiful, simple way to just show mutuality, to honor their identity, to recognize the nostalgia, again, that many of these individuals haven't had a taste of home in years. And a sense of belonging. I remember I took one gentleman from Ghana to a West African restaurant, and the other Ghanaians, he found some other Ghanaian who actually spoke his specific language from Ghana. And they were trying desperately to convince him to stay in Atlanta until they realized that he was still seeking asylum and that the asylum rejection rate in the Atlanta court was 98%. And then they said, no, don't stay in Atlanta and come back later. What a beautiful, this was the walking of welcome. They wanted him to feel like he belonged. They didn't know him, but they're like, you are one of us, until they realized what his major goal was. Then they gave him just honest feedback and said, you would be safer. You would find sanctuary. Then we take our guests to the clothing closet. This is probably the first tangible expression, because their first experience in America is detention. This is perhaps their first tangible expression of American generosity. But it's also hints, let's be honest, of our throwaway consumer orientation, isn't it? I mean, it's beautiful for me to have hospitality in a gentrified neighborhood. In a gentrified neighborhood, I can just go out to the curbs, and there's all these curb alerts on my WhatsApp, on my Facebook page that's telling me that someone's giving something away from their surplus. And yet it's the guest who remind me that true generosity is a gift of love, and when necessary, it's a sacrifice. I mean, think about the word hospitality. It's the same root word where we get the word hospital from. And the question is, in hospitality, who's being made well? That's where we get the welcome, right? Who is it that's being made well? I would say that I am also the person who's being healed when I engage in acts of hospitality. When I offer welcome, it helps make me well. It gives me something to transcend myself. So the asylum seekers, they give us gifts all the time. Whether it's a blessing, a verbal blessing, que Dios te recompensa, que videos, they buy them, they got to pay you. Whether it's handmade gifts, drawings, or the last of their clothing that they give for the next person. And my last and favorite thing about the tour of Casa Alterna that I want to give you as we think about what does it mean to welcome, as Christ would welcome, is a map. It's actually inspired by our younger son. Our younger son, at y'all's age, had a map in our home. And anytime we had guests who came over, he would welcome them over, welcome them to our home, and ask them to put a pin on the map to indicate where they had traveled from. And that map tells a story. It tells a story of all the people that he welcomed, that we welcomed, and what that meant to us. It was like a tapestry that began to weave a story, a beautiful, beautiful story. And now we do the same thing. Over 300 guests during a pandemic from 50 different countries. They come to the map and they pin where they're from, and inevitably they talk about their journey and the many countries that they had to pass, the many joys and challenges that awaited them, confronted them on this place. But the more I look back at it, it's telling a new story. It's telling a story of love that crosses borders. So how can you, at your school, at your workplace, in your home, in this congregation, create a tapestry of welcome? I hope I've left you with a few waymarks. Trust and take risk. See that of God in everyone. From the unhoused to the housed, from the impoverished to the wealthy. Be a refuge. Not just a space, be a refuge, a sanctuary. Break bread and see Jesus in the stranger. Be sacrificial and joyfully generous. And be witnesses to a love that crosses borders.
Anton. Again, in these new times, we don't take offerings in the same way anymore. If you have a check or a cash gift, there is a box that looks an awful lot like a treasure chest right out the door, and it says offering in front of it. You can just put that there. But if you, like me, have gotten used to going to restaurants and taking out your phone and looking at those QR codes that are ever so present, and I'm proud to say this week I taught Ernie Candlin about QR codes, so we're all making progress. But if you are a visitor, you can scan that here and put your information in, but if you'd like to give online, you can do that as well.
So one last story that could also really work as a children's illustration. A couple summers ago, we, Casa Chana, we lived in a neighborhood with immigrant families, and we organized a summer camp, kind of patterned after the freedom schools of the South, civil rights movement, and we taught the children a few things. The neighborhood that they were in had a fascinating history. It's a cul-de-sac with 27 units, all occupied by immigrant families and all owned by the same landlord. But before it was an immigrant, a little enclave surrounded by a lot of wealth. It's off near the country club in the town that we lived in. Before it was that, it was an African American community called Goose Holler. And no one had, that history had kind of been lost. But before that, of course, it was Creek land. And so with the children, we said, you know, we need to understand the land upon which we are living and what does it mean and who's been welcomed here and who's not been welcomed. And so we studied for a few days about who the Creek were and did some Creek art and pottery ourselves. And then we sat under a shade tree of an octogenarian, Miss Maddie, who grew up in Goose Holler, in the same neighborhood, and shared stories about what it meant to be a child and how the city welcomed blacks in the town and how it didn't welcome them into the town. Like how her daughter was one of the first to integrate the schools and just all the different challenges of what it meant to live there. And then she told us about a vacant lot in our neighborhood that was once the site of a church, a black church, and how in the 40s the church had been burned down. Or the 50s rather. It had been burned down and that the family suspected arson. The newspaper never reported it as arson, but the families, the neighbors, all suspected that it was arson. The church rebuilt in a neighboring black enclave called, interestingly enough, Red Line Alley. That's the name still to this day of the street. So when we're talking about welcoming and unwelcoming, the church is over there. But catch this with the children, what we learned. The name of that church over there, and the church that was formerly in Goose Holler, was Welcome Church. And so Welcome Church still exists. So with the children, we did two things. We recreated in that lot, we created a little pocket park. And the pocket park has a name. It's Welcome Park. And the children welcomed Miss Maddie to see us cut the ribbon for this park, to help us plant the tree. And then the next thing that the children did is the children went before city council. And 3 of the children, as representatives of the entire neighborhood, spoke before the city council and requested that a historical marker reclaiming the name Goose Holler be placed there. It was children who had Miss Maddie in the audience and who pointed to Miss Maddie as their teacher about the history of where they lived. And these are immigrant children. Welcome can happen in mysterious ways. And welcome can happen when we remember our history and we live into our future and when we let children lead the way. So, whatever this part of the benediction is, part 1 of the benediction, go and live into the mystery that God is always waiting for us on the other side of a welcome.
Now we're at the part of the service where the video has been turned off, and it's time for you to share your community updates and prayer requests. And we have ushers with the microphone, and I would ask that you